Greetings, this is Dr. Laura Knouse at the University of Richmond with your third installment of Self-Regulation at Home. In this installment, we'll go to step 3, actively managing distractions. A few reminders about the strategies I'm going to present today, and these should look familiar if you've seen videos 1 and 2. Nothing about these strategies is magical or especially complicated, but using them consistently is what's going to make them effective. And like before, you're going to be asked to actually do things during the videos. Today, you have an optional worksheet that you can use that's in the video notes below as you do the activities today. However, paper and pencil will also work just fine too. And finally, continue to take that problem-solving approach, being curious about what's happening when strategies don't work and using that as information to modify them over time. All right, so for step 3, actively managing distractions. Why would we be interested in doing this? Well, the idea here is that you're going to try to reduce the load on your attention and your own ability to self-regulate by creating situations that require less willpower. I'm paraphrasing, but I heard a quote once that I like, which is that the best self-regulators create situations that don't actually require much self-regulation. So here's an example. If you have a particular food that you find incredibly appealing, mine is Cheetos, or really anything that involves the flavor of fake cheese. The best way to keep yourself from not eating Cheetos is, as everyone knows, not buying them. And so not managing your distractions is kind of like wanting to not eat Cheetos, but then surrounding yourself with bags and bags of Cheetos and then expecting yourself not to eat them. It's not being very nice to yourself. Another way that you could think about actively managing distractions is think of your attention as basically like a toddler. It's going to go to the thing that's the most interesting, even if the thing that's most interesting is not good for them. It's not going to work out well for the toddler. So what do? We put up barriers and fences, physical barriers that reduce possible negative consequences. And then the toddler doesn't have to self-regulate to stay safe. And I'd argue that in our modern world, we have so many what I would call distraction holes that you can fall into that it's a wonder anyone gets anything done at all. Because really, these devices are specifically engineered to grab our attention and then turn that attention into money for corporations. So it's no wonder we get distracted. So the idea here is by identifying the biggest distractions and building some strategic metaphorical fences around them, we can be kinder to ourselves and we can reduce the load on our own self-regulation. All right, time to pause the video. Your task is to think for a few minutes about what distracts you most frequently and then jot down those things. You can do this on plain paper, or you can use the table that's included in the worksheet that's in the video description. Be sure to include objects and events happening in your environment, but also things that happen inside yourself, like certain emotions or thoughts that might derail you from tasks. Pause the video and go for it. All right, now that you have your list of possible distractions, we're going to talk about strategies to manage them. So the first strategy is to create, as much as you can, an environment that reduces distractions, or at least have strategies to manage major distractions when they arise. So during this time, if you're working from home, it might be more difficult to find a space to yourself. But to the extent that you can, think about what physical locations work best for you. For example, working in your bed might be comfy, but it might also lead to you falling asleep while you're working, or it might later interfere with falling asleep when you actually need to. And of course, technology distractions are going to be a key consideration for many of us. So silencing notifications on your cell phone, turning it off during certain activities, and changing the notification settings on your computer or other devices, like removing that constant ping every time an email arrives, can reduce the number of times that those devices get you off track. Another important thing, something I find really important, is managing the sound in your environment. So some folks do best with complete and utter silence, and for others of us, complete silence actually drives us to distraction. So some options other than complete silence can be lyric-free music, like classical music, ambient music, or film soundtracks. And these can be great options for some people. And streaming services like Spotify, which is what I use, actually have libraries of focused playlists that include things like coffee shop background noises or other kind of low lyric and lyric-free music. And my favorite playlist on Spotify right now is the Lo-Fi Beats playlist, just a little recommendation there. And there are strategies that you can address to use frequent feelings or thoughts that tend to distract you. So for example, if you constantly find yourself kind of remembering other things that you need to do when you're working on one task and then getting distracted, you can be prepared by having a notepad next to you where you can jot down these other ideas or urges for later. And if they're that important, then they can move to your actual goal list or become a rewarding activity. For more information and ideas about distraction management strategies, you can see the worksheet that I linked to in the video description. Now, go ahead and pause the video and write down some potential management strategies for each of the distractions that you identified in the previous part. All right, we're going to get distracted and take a little detour for a moment, and I'm going to give you a bonus sleep tip. So while we're on the topic of modifying our environments in helpful ways, I want to share an excellent sleep tip that emerged from my work with my students this past year in my Principles of Behavior class. So how many of you, myself included, are going to confess to using your phone in bed even though you know it's not good for your sleep and you keep scrolling and scrolling even though it makes you feel gross? Well, 3 students in my Principles of Behavior class had similar issues, including having trouble getting out of bed on time because of reduced sleep the night before because of cell phone use. In that class, my students engineer their own solutions to behavior problems, and independent of one another, all 3 of them came up with the same simple but effective solution. Simply move the telephone charger from the bedside table to the other side of the room. These students saw increased sleep time and sleep quality, and it was easier for them to get up the next morning more consistently. And one of my students even drastically increased the amount of time he spent reading just for fun. So go ahead and try it out. All right, back to the task at hand. So you've jotted down some ideas for engineering your environment and your strategies to reduce the number of times you get distracted. Let's talk about another way you could harness the power of distractions, and that's actually using the distraction as one of your rewarding activities in that plan that you're using to use consequences to pull your behaviors along. So for example, you might plan to watch that next episode of whatever Netflix show you're obsessed with when you finish your goal list for the day. So you can build in distractions as rewarding activities in advance using your goal list. But you can also sort of use this idea on the fly. So for example, when I'm working on something, I'll periodically have the thought or urge to go Google some unrelated topic that I'm curious about. If I can hold off just until I'm done with the task at hand, maybe write that idea on the legal pad that's next to me, then this little distraction can actually become a motivating reward in that moment. All right, let's go ahead and pause the video again, and I'm going to ask you to do 2 things. First, you're going to add the distraction management strategies that you identified as goals on your goal list. So actually make a goal or task list item that tells you to go ahead and do all those things to reduce the distractions in your environment so you know you'll get them done. And then incorporate any new reward activities you identified from your distraction analysis into your goal plan. Go ahead and pause and get those done. All right, so you've got this distraction management built into your plan, but what if? What if you get distracted anyway? Well, you know what? It's going to happen. You're not perfect. You won't know or be aware of all the distractions in advance. Just use that instance as data or information and then problem solve a management strategy. Remember, no plan's perfect, and what distracts you is going to move and change as things in your life change. But your general problem-solving approach is always going to be available to you to flexibly figure out new solutions. Great, so I'm excited to talk about a technology tool that's going to help us manage distractions. And it actually is pretty cool because it pulls together several ideas that have been presented in this video series. So this tool is called the Pomodoro method. This is a method that was developed by Francesco Cirillo when he was a college student. A Pomodoro is a unit of time, in this case 25 minutes, and it's named after the tomato-shaped timer that Cirillo used to work out his time periods or to track his 25-minute time periods in this method. The purpose of this method is to help you work for longer periods of time on less preferred tasks. Basically, it helps you get in and stay in the zone. So here's how you do it. First, you're going to identify what the goal is that you're working on. And then you're going to start the timer for 25 minutes and work on that goal. You work until the timer rings. And then when the timer rings, you're going to take a 5-minute break. I recommend timing this break too, just to make sure. And then after you complete 4 Pomodoros, essentially almost 2 hours of work, you're going to take a longer break of 20 to 30 minutes for something like going for lunch, maybe watch a Netflix episode, something of that nature. So in a way, the Pomodoro method pulls together a lot of the principles we've covered in this video series. So the goal of working on whatever task for 25 minutes is fairly specific and realistic. And then those 5-minute breaks kind of function as consequences, as little mini rewarding activities. And then of course that longer break does as well. And actually the ticking of the timer sort of serves as a subtle reminder to stay on task, thereby reducing distraction in some ways. Now, luckily, you don't have to use a physical timer anymore. There are lots of apps and plugins that can support the use of this strategy. I personally use an app called Pomodoro Timer Pro on my Android phone, but there are tons of timers available for all different types of devices. And there's also a Pomodoro Pro plugin for the Chrome browser, which I just discovered by researching for this video series, and I'm very excited to use it. But these two are just a few of those that are available. I'll link to some in the video description below. All right, as usual, it's now your turn to try it out in real life. Experiment with different strategies, different pieces of what I've talked about today. Not every piece is going to work for you or be feasible to work into your life, but pay attention to the results of your experimentation with these things and use them to engineer better processes. Remember again that imperfect consistency is better than one-time perfection. You need to focus on being compassionate to yourself as you try to make these changes and focusing on making little incremental changes over time. And be prepared to re-engage with the strategies from time to time. As your life circumstances change, your sticking with the strategies may wax and wane, and you'll just need to engineer new strategies for new situations and challenges that you face. And finally, I want to thank you for coming along with me on this journey of skills and strategies. It's been a pleasure. I've already heard from a few of you about how you've been using the strategies, but please do feel free to send me an email. Let me know how things are going. Let me know down in the comments how things are for you. And good luck. Happy self-regulating.